I want to introduce our guest. She has been on our show before, way back in the day when we were on public access and on radio. So I think for the Hard Lens Media family and community, please give a warm welcome to someone who has been on our show. I'm glad to reintroduce her. Her name is Carrie Barber. She is an independent journalist like ourselves. She's done a lot of activism in the past and a lot of organizing too. So Carrie, I know for our viewers and subscribers, we're going to be talking about a very strictly Illinois subject, but it matters because it deals with environmentalism, pollution, and, you know, corruption here in the state of Illinois. So there's going to be some things I'm going to ask you to clarify, because a lot of our audiences now, we got a bigger audience, a lot of our audience is out of state, so this is an Illinois thing, but I think it's very important that we really talk about this subject. So first, please introduce yourself to our viewers and subscribers, because a lot of them don't know who you are.
Sure. My name is Carrie Barber. I live here in Illinois. I was a Bernie-endorsed candidate in 2016. Former board member of an Our Revolution group. I've been a volunteer for numerous campaigns for progressive candidates. Freelance journalist, writer, and working on different independent media programs. So
right.
It's kind of how I fell into this story.
And so, just to be clear, we've been in active communication about corruption in Illinois, political campaigns, and you've told us some stories that are happening too. You've introduced some candidates that are running for office to us here and there, and now recently, and I think it's important that we let people know that this is still an ongoing story. It's still being reported on. I know that you've reached out to the local CBS outlet here in Chicago, and and again, if I get something wrong about that, please clarify.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, where I think it's this is relevant for your audience, while this is happening in Illinois and Chicago, the situation that is happening here is nationwide, and I think in particular for our progressive audience, especially candidates, we're going to talk a little bit about how the machine in Chicago is playing a big role into this. So I'd like to get into some of the tactics that they've used to make a bad situation horrifically worse.
Right, and also The Intercept is looking on the story too. So you sent me this document. We tried to get it up, but unfortunately the writing was too small. But we will be giving, when this video is edited, there will be a link to where our viewers can see this full entire PDF that you sent me. And it's the ETO Crisis, A Tale of Two Communities, Willowbrook, Illinois, and Waukegan, Illinois. Why is it a tale between two communities?
Oh, right. So this story actually starts years and years ago. Okay. It just came to light in November of 2018 because the local newspaper, the Chicago Trib, actually broke the story. Yes. It was actually known to our local state representatives before that, but the public did not know. So the situation is we have a chemical called ethylene oxide. And ethylene oxide, you will know it in the bunker buster bombs. So these bombs were the ones that they were dropping, and they could go down several different floors. Inside that was ethylene oxide. It's highly volatile. And so what it would do is it would explode, and the explosion happens at, I think they said it was Mach 6. And what it does is pulls the oxygen out of the air. So it's not necessarily the blast that kills you, but your lungs explode. So this chemical, it's also used in sterilization. We used to use it in back of the yards here to sterilize meat. Today it's used for various things, in particular for sterilization of medical equipment. And we have several facilities here in Illinois, and they're around the country as well. So if you look into your own state with ethylene oxide, I'm sure you're going to find it. Some of the company names you want to look for: Sterigenics, Medline, other things like this. So these companies are using that chemical to sterilize medical equipment in some cases. So what happened was they weren't well regulated. And so this chemical was escaping into the air and making people sick. And in Illinois, it happened in two distinct locations. Down in DuPage in Willowbrook, which Willowbrook is a small, it's not quite a city, it's a village area. But to give you a profile, it's about 75% white. It's a median income of about $71,000 to $72,000. Home values median are about $223,000. So it's a successful kind of community. And then to the north of us here in Chicago, you have Waukegan and Gurnee. Now, Waukegan has a median income of $24,000. It's 72 to 73% minority, meaning Latino or African American. So already you're starting to see the differences here. The median home value is about $123,000. So it's modest income, working class neighborhood. So the difference between the two, long and short of it, is Willowbrook had their facility that was poisoning people. People were coming down with cancer and all sorts of ailments.
Yeah, this was a big deal in 2019.
Yes, and they had their facility shut down by order of the governor.
Governor J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah. Waukegan still has their facility open. So a year and a half later, it's still open. So what I went through, and I was just pulling publicly available information. So it was very interesting to me that there's, in this story is not just environmental racism and inequality, but there's also a mixture of the political, because Sterigenics had financial ties to former Governor Rauner, whereas the Medline facility has ties to the Democratic allied. So that facility, if you look at this chart, and I did post it in your Facebook community area.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. We've actually kind of divorced ourselves from Facebook here and there.
I understand.
But nonetheless, yes, that is up there.
Yeah. So what you see is Medline has gotten tax break after tax break after tax break, meaning taxes that they should be paying to the community in Waukegan have been withheld from their schools, from their community, and Medline took that profit. So you have people there who are paying for the privilege of having a company poison them, poison their children, poison their families. And let's be clear about this. People have been sick. People have died. People will die. Right. This is still going on today.
So I think a lot of our viewing audience, and myself included, especially because we were talking about this, and I was asking you, well, how is this allowed to happen? Who is allowing this to happen? Who's willingly turning a blind eye and still knowing that this facility is getting all those people in those communities sick still? Why is this allowed to happen? Who is allowing this to happen?
Well, I think this is where, in my view, the political machine comes into play.
The Illinois Democratic political machine, or are we talking about the entire political
The machine. So in this, there's a fuzzy line between Democrat and Republican. So please don't think this is a red team, blue team thing. It's not.
It's both teams.
Right. Yeah. So what we see is one facility getting all of these tax breaks, and at the same time you have a rise of these citizen groups, right? So this is what I was looking at, asking the question, where are the grassroots organizations? Where's Black Lives Matter? Where's LULAC? Where is Our Revolution? Where are all of these groups that you would expect to be out there? Well, one of them that I looked at was Stop ETO. Great group, doing some good things. But one of the issues that we had there that I thought was pretty interesting was we had an issue with white fragility there. So you had two women of color who had been instrumental in starting that group and pushing it forward. One of them actually went and testified before the EPA in Washington, fighting for their community. But you had one of the, she self-identifies as Caucasian, and she herself was telling them that she was uncomfortable with bringing race into it, and terms like environmental racism, when clearly this is what's going on. Even The Intercept, their article was front and center with it. So what happened was these two women of color ended up getting pushed out of the organization. And it wasn't too much longer that the incumbent state rep, who should have been responsible and on the front lines of all of this, who was remarkably silent for years, she stepped in, befriended this person, made a public donation publicly on their Facebook page from her own campaign funds, which in the state of Illinois is illegal.
Okay.
And that's right there front and center. So this same organizer with the group is there congratulating her for another political run that she hasn't even made yet. So you have this over and over again. And then the one thing I noticed was the state rep who is ultimately responsible. She's on the board of Black Lives Matter. Okay. And then I went and looked at LULAC, and you have the head of LULAC in Waukegan openly posting praise to Medline. So one by one, you're looking at all of these groups that you would expect to be there on the picket line, to be out there fighting for people, isn't. And then just this week, the most egregious one, in my opinion, you had the Sierra Club in Waukegan area, and they have on their website an entire list of platform proposals, bills that have gone through the State House that the current rep has either not voted in, voted against, or not supported. They endorsed her. And so one by one, each and every one of these things are failing. So you have a failure at the government level with the state representatives. You have a failure of the local representation. And then you have that final check and balance of the failure of the grassroots organizations. On top of this, the same organization that put out 36 different pieces, the Chicago Tribune, on ETO, remarkably stopped reporting on Waukegan in early 2019 and focused exclusively on Willowbrook. They just endorsed the incumbent. So you can see very clearly, and this is why I think your progressive audience is going to notice these trends, where you have something that is blatantly egregious to the point where it's criminal negligence. And all of the... Let's just be frank. If we were talking about 100 dogs in a kennel being poisoned, people would be up in arms. But because we're talking about 19,000 brown and black bodies, everyone's silent.
Okay. Now, I think what our audience wants to know is, who is the current state representative that's running this area?
Sure.
That should be vocal on the front lines, because the sad fact is about here in Illinois, and this is something that we've learned about, is that we have laws that are 100 years old that no longer apply to today's standards, unfortunately. Right. And so the Illinois EPA is in a weird spot. Not only is it kind of theoretically toothless, it really can't enact any laws because the laws haven't been changed for so long, because it's so stagnant. So there's a lot of Superfund sites here in the state of Illinois. There's a lot of polluted communities in the state of Illinois, a lot of environmental racism in the state of Illinois. It's impacting a lot of working class communities in the state of Illinois. So it's an ongoing problem. So who is the state rep?
Sure. So I'm glad you brought up Superfund sites. So the current state representative is Rita Mayfield, and she serves in Illinois' 60th district. Now, when she stepped up to serve 10 years ago, this area, in the entire state of Illinois, we have 12 Superfund toxic sites. 5 of them are in her district. So if you're going to step up and run in a district that has such a dire need, you understand that that is your responsibility. You are there to fight and defend those people. But what you can see by voting record and action, time and time again, she didn't. So I just took it upon myself to look at, here in Illinois, we have a website called illinoissunshine.org. Okay. And what they do is they take campaign finance data and make it really easy to search. So when I looked up her campaign, which is Friends of Rita Mayfield, I found oil and gas and the chem lobby. I found banks. I found Monsanto. I found 2 donations from Charles Koch PACs to the tune of $10,000. So we can see repeatedly, and I only went from 2018 to 2019. I didn't go back further than that. So if you look at all of this, she has, I think it's 2.3 or 2.9% individual donations. The rest of it is all of these groups, the very same groups that are responsible for poisoning the families that she's there to represent. So just follow the money in these stories, and you're going to find all sorts of information like this.
It's an example of why we got to get money out of politics.
Exactly.
And it's impacting Democrats and Republicans, and unfortunately the people that are being hurt the most are civilians, just regular average people working their daily jobs, trying to provide for their families, and they're living in polluted communities. So you mentioned something about Chicago and our role in this, because early on, like when we were speaking about this story, of course, The Intercept is looking in on the story. You said it's ongoing, like their rep hasn't gone back to
the
Intercept. Can you clarify this about was The Intercept and CBS 2 local? I mean, because I want to know a little bit about this.
Sure. So The Intercept has, I don't recall her name at the moment. There's a journalist who covers environmental issues, and she clearly recognized what was going on in Waukegan. So she put out a story, Environmental Racism. So if you do a quick search, Intercept, Environmental Racism, and then put in the name Diana Burdett, because that's important. That first story will come up. There are actually 2 stories, and you can find both of those just by finding the one. So they're following this story very closely, because what we're talking about, everybody hears Flint, 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 which was horrible. This makes Flint look like a walk in the park.
That's a bold statement to make.
Oh, I'm telling you, because what we're talking about is not just this airborne chemical, but it leaches into the groundwater. And ETO is so volatile that when you're talking about this chemical leaching into groundwater, it's there. You can't filter it out. Right, exactly. So at one point, I don't recall who it was, but somebody had this bold idea that they were going to take the ETO storage containers and bury them to get rid of the air. The problem was the site that they picked was a massive junction that feeds water to Chicago. So what happens with ETO is when it mixes with water, it turns into antifreeze. So you would be poisoning 6.6 million people in the city of Chicago.
So, I just can't help but, I'm looking at Daniel in the back. We've done a lot of environmental racism stories. We've done a lot of environmental pollution stories. We did a short documentary in Indiana. And the thing is, now that you mentioned Chicago, we have Mayor Rahm Emanuel to thank for lead in our drinking water, which the city has turned a blind eye to. I mean, I still remember when Jordan Sheridan was covering Flint.
Yes.
And he mentioned, well, imagine this happening in New York City. Well, Chicago is the size of New York City, and it's happening here.
Yes.
And there's nothing but utter silence. But also, the reason why I mentioned Indiana is because you have these industrial facilities dumping regulated toxic waste. What I mean by that is they dilute the pollution with water and then dump it into Lake Michigan. But we in Chicago also use that water. So it's on 3 fronts. There's lead in our drinking water. There's industrial waste in Lake Michigan coming into our drinking water. And now there's this ETO antifreeze. Can you clarify that again?
It's ethylene oxide. It's ETO is what you would find it under. So you've got the ETO happening in the same location where you've got the coal ash filtering into, and this is just 20 minutes from here, maybe 20 minutes.
Okay.
So all of this is happening here, and 20 minutes north of that is Foxconn, right across
in Wisconsin, which we've also covered.
Right down the line here. So it's one thing after another completely. So one point I really want to make, and I need to stress this to people, the Union of Concerned Scientists poured through the data to figure out why. Why was a place like Waukegan, why is this happening? And one of the things that they found was a correlation between voting, civic engagement, and these companies. So what these companies are actually doing is looking for low-income areas, modest working-class areas, and low civic engagement. So what they do is they can come in and they can put their own people in place at the village or the city as mayor and whatnot, or a state representative, and they know that people don't vote or won't be involved and won't be engaged.
So this goes back to something we said on the show. You have power. Your vote is power. It's either you're designing the menu or you're being being served as a meal.
Yep.
And for a long time, corporate media, and yes, even entertainment has always made the joke of, oh well, your vote does matter. So don't worry. Trust the people in suit and tie. Everything's going to be fine. This is another example of why this needs to be stopped. But I think also while we're on this subject too, what other role does Chicago play in this? Because we mentioned like that there's some connection from the city of Chicago to all this too. So let's clarify this, because again, the story's still ongoing.
Which part are we talking about?
You mentioned a little bit of Chicago political system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this goes into how I got involved because while I'm a supporter of progressives in our state, I was busy working on other things. I knew that there was a progressive challenger who had stepped up to run, but I wasn't paying attention to it. And then I got a call from somebody who claimed to be a friend of a friend and wanted me to talk to Rita Mayfield. Because he had just come off of a campaign working for Amy Klobuchar and was looking for more campaign work. So I recommended, there's this progressive candidate. Her name is Diana Burdette, Burdette, running against Rita Mayfield. And he said, no, Rita's a friend of mine. Okay, fine. So he called me later and said, I want you to talk to Rita. And I thought that was odd. Usually I don't get that kind of phone call. And I'm like, well, it's fine, whatever. So he was insistent and he put this meeting together. Rita drove 2 hours to come see me personally. Because most people don't know this, but I am 90% blind. I can't drive. So there was no way I was going to her. She made the point to come all the way out there, and we had a lovely breakfast. She is a delightful individual.
Sounds nice.
And I still didn't know why she was there until we got to the end of the breakfast, and she said, I want you to stay out of my race. I was like, what do you mean? She said, well, I just want you not to be involved in it. And I said, well, I'm always going to support the progressive, but thank you. And we concluded our breakfast, and it was lovely. So now it got me thinking, why do they not want me in this race? So this is when I started looking into things. And the more that I started to find, the more that I was outraged, because this has gone beyond simple politics into criminal behavior. And what we have here is the Chicago machine going out to leaders in our revolution, in all of these civic groups, and either telling them, I want you to stay out of it, or dangling some policy in front of them like, I will introduce Medicare for all if you will, but support me. Meanwhile, for those of us who support Bernie Sanders, he said, fight for somebody you don't even know. So I am going to forego the temptation of introducing Medicare for all in Illinois, which I know is not going to be supported under the current tenure.
Yes.
In order to fight for the people, these 19,000 people who are working hard, trying to survive and care for their families, now have extensive medical bills, now have entire teams of attorneys trying to get them to file lawsuits. Well, number one, you can't necessarily prove that your cancer is caused by this. And two, if you sign on to a class action suit, that $24 that you get at the end of this term 4, 5, 6 years from now is not going to cover your medical bills, but that attorney is going to get paid.
Okay. You know, this is, again, why we got to get money out of politics. This is why people need to get involved, because it's easy to pay attention to a presidential race. It's easy to pay attention towards something on the national stage. But every election, every level of politics in this country matters. State level, county level, city level, municipal level. It doesn't matter at this point, because at this point, what's happening here in Illinois is happening all across the country. Whether you like it or not, whether it's in a red state or a blue state, it doesn't matter how old or young you are, it's happening. And we, for a long time, have been allowing this to happen because we assume that the people in power know what they're doing. Newsflash, they don't.
Right.
So I'm sorry you had to go through that, have that lovely breakfast, and then someone tell you, stay out of this race. I mean, already that's raising red flags, like, who are you to say that? And this isn't Boardwalk Empire where someone's threatening another person.
Oh, because, there were threats in there.
But
that came 2 days later. So,
yes. So again, I think for a lot of our viewers, as we wrap this interview up, who is helping the people that are being impacted by this environmental pollution? What groups are there? Is there anyone in authority, political power that's helping them out? And then finally, where can people go to learn more?
Sure. Okay, so the candidate that stepped up to run, she herself has an amazing story. She's a Latina who, I don't know if she'll want me to say this or not, but her own grandmother was a slave back in their home country, and that's how they became immigrants to this country. So she is here with this amazing family story, but she herself was dying because of this. She had a young toddler and had just given birth to their second child, was nursing, and herself was losing. She lost like 80 pounds and could not figure out why. Both her children were sick. Her husband was getting sick. Well, he had the good fortune to get a better job. And they moved just a few blocks away, and they all recovered. That's when they knew something was wrong. So here you have somebody with this amazing story, a Latina woman who is part of her community, survive this and decide enough. She had tried to engage with Rita. She had tried to engage with the system, and every time was pushed away. So she said, enough is enough. I'm going to step up to run. And this is Diana Burdett. So full disclosure, I, after this meeting and the investigation, and then I was personally threatened, I became a volunteer in January. So right now it's her volunteer team, and we just got the Bernie Sanders campaign in Illinois. So we did our first joint canvass this past weekend. So I am a volunteer for her. I do some of her social media and things like that, but
well, we would like to actually have her on as a guest.
Lovely.
Let's coordinate and let that happen so we actually have her on our show, and so that our viewers and subscribers can know more about her and her campaign. I think it's very important that we really do what we can to make sure this story is going to be continuing on to be covered. And any updates that do happen, please reach out to me so that we can actually give a follow-up.
Absolutely. And I just want to tell people locally, if you're here in District 60, March 17th is her election. It's coming up. This is not November. This is March 17th. She's running in the primary against the current incumbent. So voting is already open and starting now. So
let's make this happen. So now then, for our viewers, if they want to learn more about you, follow you on social media, because I know that you've been doing a lot of investigative work. You've done a lot of great work in the past, and I urge people to check out our previous interview with you. This was during your lawsuit at the time. Where can people learn more about you online on social media?
Well, I'm actually part of another group starting up in our own independent media company focused on educating progressives how to be good candidates and learn the rules and inside of it. So it's called Progressive Insider. So our goal is to make sure that we're not sending good candidates like lambs to the slaughter. We want you to know what these dirty tricks are and what their playbook looks like. And we want you to learn from organizers and strategists and people who have been there and are actually in the thick of things so that these sort of things don't happen to you.
Carrie Barber, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you so much for being a guest. Please come back to us with more information. Let's coordinate to get that candidate that's running against Rita on our show. Let's make that happen sooner rather than later, because our primary is coming on March 17th. So let's make this happen. This is Kit with Heartlands Media. Peace to you guys, and let us all do we can to build a better future.